Good afternoon, good day, and thank you for joining us in this third day in the series of Power and Mining Digital Dialogues. My name is Claire Volkvan. I'm the head of content for Inland Africa, and this series is brought to you in collaboration with Mining Review Africa and ESI Africa. Over the course of the week, we have been exploring the concept of beyond the grid. As mentioned previously, this doesn't necessarily mean off the grid, but it is more of an acknowledgement that there is a lot happening in terms of the provision of energy that is outside the scope of Eskom and traditionally grid-connected power. Now, over the last 2 days, we've discussed the general landscape for power and mining in South Africa in particular, and some of the options available to mitigate power issues such as load shedding, and also address other items like the types of generation options that are available, ESG, the push for sustainability, and the need to do a thorough analysis of your landscape utilizing data analytics. The focus on net zero is front and center on so many minds at the moment, but as we employ more and more intermittent renewable forms of power, we do have to ask ourselves what this means for daily operations. With the renewable energy model, the energy sources are free but variable, which of course results in variable generation. Storage is therefore a critical technical requirement for optimizing supply and matching demand, but it does have a bigger focus than just kind of seeing you through load shedding. So that's going to be some of the focus of today's discussion. Now, I'm very pleased that joining me today to talk about some of these things are Joanne Dean, who is the CEO of Energy and the spokesperson for the South African Energy Storage Association, and Frank Spencer, Head of Deployment for Bushveld Minerals. Joe, Frank, thank you both for joining me today and for sharing some of your thoughts and experience with us.
Thank you, Claire. It's a pleasure to be here, and hello to the audience.
I do believe Joe is just, Joe, hi, good.
In a car, as you can see, but I'm doing my very best to be here. The time important here. I've just left the mine, so I'm really sorry, but I'm here.
No problem at all. As I was just going to say, Joe has literally just stepped out of a meeting to be with us. What I'm going to do, if I may, is ask if you could start, Joe, perhaps we could start with you and ask if you could just give a short introduction of yourself and the organization that you are representing today.
Hi. Okay. Let me just try and get the webcam. Sorry, I'm balancing on the back seat here. All right, so my name is Jodine. Obviously, everybody I think knows me. I'm at a lot of the energy councils, sit on BUSA's energy committees, various multiple areas. With a huge passion for decarbonization. So my day-to-day training is actually to do decarbonization projects, and the low-hanging fruit, I hate that saying, but it's a true one. The low-hanging fruit is obviously the renewable energy or the green energy or the clean energy. I became very passionate about it because it wasn't happening, and we had to get this happening, and so I got very involved in all the different associations to see whether we could sort of, how can I say, expedite, I think that would be a nice word, expedite the policies and the regulations, but also for entities to embrace the technologies. And I always say with storage, if I think back on to when we had the PV conversations, remember that it took us 10 years. If you spoke to different entities on PV, it was, what is a PV panel? Can we? Yes, we want to do that. Knock on a bank's door and oh no, and backwards and forwards. And storage became very much a nascent industry. It was very quick. It's 2 years and it's up and it's in and it's changing. And I think a lot of people have a huge, how can I say, educational gap to be able to embrace the energy storage. And so I trundled along with the PV and all the other different entities, but I think storage became very, very important. And my view just is this, and it might be differing to anybody else there listening to this this engagement. But with the current status that we have with Eskom, and I don't think we want to belabor that, but with all the knowledge that we have on the transmission development planning, etc., storage is a very vital technology. We need to get it established, we need to get it accepted, and we need to get it into the South African grid as fast as possible, both from a point of view of the energy shortage supply, but because of the transition that Eskom's making across the TFD, we've got all the well-touted technologies coming. We're having the green hydrogen conversations and all of those, but those are a way off. And I mean, for all the gas people and for the other different entities, what about today? What about tomorrow? What about soon? And that's the thing that I feel that if the billions that are needed to expand the Eskom transmission grid are not available, how do we expand it from a technology point of view? And that's where storage has actually come to the fore. But these are conversations not held further afield, and this is the knowledge sharing that we need to do. And then the second one is that we're in a crisis. So the mine that Uptis left now is in a crisis. They need security of supply. They need the storage, and that's what we're defending, and that's what we're fighting for. It's to make those decisions today. We can have all the nice conversations about ESG and all the other related, but this is what's critical right now.
Jo, thanks very much. Frank, Bushveld Minerals and what you're doing, can you give us just a brief introduction?
Absolutely. So I sit within the Bushveld Energy team, which is currently owned by Bushveld Minerals, but is likely to be spun out into a separate entity. And we're really promoting the local value chain for vanadium redox flow batteries in South Africa. Vanadium redox flow batteries, or VRFBs, are extremely well suited to large, long duration storage applications, as we're seeing emerge from grids, utility requirements, mining requirements, in order to bring stability to the scale of renewables that we're going to see deployed, as well as to provide a whole lot of other services that storage can do, whether or not it's coupled with renewables. So it's one of the technologies that I think has a unique value proposition for South Africa to get on the bandwagon in terms of manufacturing and deployment, not only into South Africa, where we could do the batteries with very high local content, but also to export various components of the battery, if not the entirety of the batteries, into Africa and beyond.
Frank, we've obviously had a couple of conversations around energy storage and the various business cases, because of course, a mine's not going to just implement energy storage because it's a good to do. There has to be a supporting business case. But I was wondering, just from a from the current landscape, and perhaps bringing in some of that business case, why is energy storage such a reasonable technology to be considering?
So I think the first thing to note is that the technologies are very mature. So it's not like you would be experimenting with something new when you deploy a battery technology, unless of course you want to use an experimental technology, but they are very mature technologies. What we haven't had in the past is, as you mentioned, the use cases or the applications where storage would make sense. We now, both in front of the meter and behind the meter are seeing that the use cases make sense. So if we take a mine, for example, that A is struggling with electricity costs and B is struggling with load shedding and perhaps quality of supply issues as well, the deployment of storage can bring a lot of value to a mine. For example, they could overbuild on the renewables side, so that they can increase their renewables penetration into their demand. They can use the storage then to also basically do tariff arbitrage. If you're buying, the difference between off-peak standard and peak tariffs can be enough to justify either charging the battery from off-peak electricity or from additional renewables to deploy into peak hours. And then if you couple that with the fact that the battery can provide the backup services that may otherwise be provided by a diesel genset, and to do that seamlessly without any changeover, when you start coupling these value propositions, the diesel saving, the electricity saving, the ability to incorporate more cheap renewables, and perhaps also solve power quality issues like power factor or flicker or some other issues, when these use cases are stacked up, we are seeing that the case for storage is starting to make commercial sense.
I particularly like the fact that this is a situation where you're able to build business cases on top of one another. You know, it's not a case of either or. All of these are complementary, to your business case, but also to the more efficient running of the mine, particularly in times of instability.
Exactly, yes.
Joe, perhaps you could share with us, just in terms of some of the work that you're doing at the moment, if you are seeing anything in addition to what Frank has already mentioned, just in terms of why energy storage is being considered at the moment.
Okay, I think if we maybe reflect on one of the current projects, so aside from all my natterings on about the industry space, I think that we've got a very big mining project that we're executing. So it's a large PV footprint, 60 megawatts. The battery is going to be life powerful. It's going to be one of the biggest currently, I would say, in Africa. So we're very ambitious. We're looking at 40 megawatts inverter size and 160 megawatts worth of storage. We've had to tailor make the business case for the mine to make it practical. So you've got a huge renewable energy component, you've got the battery storage component, and then you have to look at the integration of it. So we're not just facilitating to one load, we're facilitating to two loads of a mine, which has got an 11.2 kilometer distance between it. So added to your capex budget would be, you know, your infrastructure, your lines, substations, and the rest. So on that capex budget to how can I say, make this financially practical against Megaflex, because obviously mines are all on Megaflex. It's very interesting to see the difference, and this project actually enabled an Eskom upgrade. So the client is actually upgrading from 11 kV Megaflex to an 88 kV, which puts them into a premium customer. And it's going to avoid a number of issues that the mine has, including, you know, sort of nuisance trips. You know, as Frank said, they've got a lot of extra, you know, wobblies coming at them. You know, we've got dirty power, inconsistent power, nuisance trips, etc. So the battery forms almost like a, let's say, I hate to say the UPS capability, but it forms that. Then we've got all the scenarios. If you think from a control philosophy point of view, you've got all the scenarios of the mine's needs, right? So the battery system is actually paying its rent. So if you had to think of the mine had to continue with its great big diesel genset footprint, right? So just for blackouts and for outages, they're now able to sustain themselves. You've got an oversized PV, you know, as your power source. So that's dealing with pricing. But let's deal with day-to-day operations, right? So a mine, when it faces curtailment, if it's in stage 1, 2, and 3, they have they're able to how can I say, ramp down on their load a little bit, and curtailment doesn't become an issue with them. So you must remember that the big mining entities and the big EU IG guys, they don't get load shedding as such. They have dedicated supply points, and they are curtailed, right? So the battery system then enables them to ride through that curtailment. Now, it was very interesting for me on this project is to understand that when they go to stage 3 and higher, then curtailment is unaffordable for them, because then they actually have to start shutting plants down. And we all know that the value of stoppage, right, is in excess of 1 million to 2 million rand a day. So that was, I think, the key part of that, was to give them that security of supply from different control philosophy points of view. You know, if you have a brownout or whether you have curtailment. And I mean, I'm not on a slamming Eskom base. I'm a pragmatist, and if we had to look at the situation now, we know that we're going to be experiencing a level stage 5 fix a lot over the next year. I mean, it's I think it's public knowledge. So this was the added benefit for the client, and then it did trigger the ESG component as well. A lot of people are talking about how do you actually green storage, and that, but combining it into a hybrid system like this is also managed to alleviate a lot of the pressures the mines have facing them, because we all know where they're going to go to on taxes within 2025, 26. So there is a secondary, you know, more soft benefits on this. But for now, I think all of us should be thinking about, we need to pull up our bootstraps, and it's about survival. it's about survival as where's the pricing of electricity going, which is a killer with mines. We know what the escalations are going to be next year. So this alleviates them from a pricing point of view. But I think many of them have got frowns on their faces at the moment because most of them are now more concerned, not just on the pricing killing them and closing them down, but on the fact of security of supply.
If you were, I mean, I don't know if this is information that you're able to share, but what is the sort of payback or return on investment period that your client is looking at the moment? And again, if you can't share that information, I totally understand.
Well, let's just sanitize it and say any mine, it should be a major capex investment. I mean, if you're looking at a substantial load, any mine is on a 30 to 40 MV. So I've done this for a couple of mines. I've got a couple of proposals in, so we can talk on any one of those. If they self capex, self fund on the PV asset.
Joe, sorry, I think that that
the infrastructure asset and the capex, then their return is and I mean this against this Megaflex type.
Okay, Joe, I'm sorry, we seem to be losing you. I think that unfortunately, being out on the mines at the moment, your signal is a little bit hit and miss in some spots. So while we're waiting for Joe to perhaps get into a slightly better coverage area,
Hi.
Frank, I am going to ask. Oh, hi. Are you back?
Hear me?
Yes, we can
Sorry.
now.
Yes, I'm back. Did you hear the first part or not?
Unfortunately, we didn't. If I could ask just to give us to repeat that, I think it was quite interesting. So I think we'd all like to hear what you had to share.
It was maybe from the car to the office, so I think we got lost. Yes. Okay, so if we took it across any of the mines, it's a fantastic opportunity, right? So I'm not focused on my specific project. I've done this modeling for numerous of the mines. Most mines are, say, for instance, between a 30 MB to a 40 MB load. Then the capex element from that to support, I mean, we're looking at in the region of 2 billion rand, right? That would be your infrastructure, your asset on the storage, and your PV. Irrespective if you did this on type of PPA contracts or capacity rental contracts or self capex. It's proven that the return for them, even versus an 11 kV or 33 kV or 88 MV, you know, or whatever you call it, Megaflex tariff, you're looking at under 7 years. And if one had to then put in lost production or elements of curtailment or added cherries, you know what I mean? That's not looking at carbon credits, you know, other softer benefit offsets. So it is a very viable and very practical solution for mines, but it's a very big step for them to take. Do you understand? It's quite a thing. Yeah. And the mines measure things according to what they call their IR rate. So they look at projects. So say, for instance, they want to do a development somewhere or sink a new shaft in that. They look at the profitability and the viability. There's an index that they use. And on any of their current projects, the indexes for expansion are at about a 1.6 return. On a PV project like this, it's a 2.6 return. So it's actually an easy decision for boards and for senior management of mines to make. And I think that is what's instrumental, is understanding the mining industry, understanding how they're measuring, understanding what the mining charter is, and to be able to enable this.
Thanks very much. I think that's you know, quite an interesting insight. So Frank, if I could direct the next question to you, is really where are we seeing the adoption of renewable energy in the mining sector at the moment? I don't know if you're able to speak to any projects that you're aware of, or if you are busy with any installations that, and here when I'm saying renewable energy, I do mean plus storage.
So I think, you know, historically the constraint has been that the mines wanted to build large projects and they couldn't under the regulatory environment. Now that we've had the cap removed, I've been referring to it as something of a tsunami of projects that's going to be coming predominantly from the mining sector. And we've seen the first few of those going through, getting NERSA regulatory approval and construction even started. But the expectation is that the volume of these projects could quite quickly get to around 5 gigawatts per year, again, predominantly being built by the private sector. And I think one of the most informative pieces of information speaking to this that recently came out was Eskom's latest transmission and development plan. Because in their TDP, they're working with all of the applications that the private sector are putting in for grid capacity to build new power plants and new load centers. And off the back of that, we're basically seeing that there is this huge wave of renewables projects coming, and that the mining sector is going to lead on that. And coupled with that, actually, their modeling showed that we need in the next 10 years 8 gigawatts of storage on the grid as well, whether that's deployed behind the meter by the private sector or by Eskom or the municipalities. That's going to be needed to basically complement this scale of renewables to be built. In terms of practical projects, I mean, I would say there almost isn't a mining house that we've spoken to that isn't actively doing work around some form of solutioning for renewables, whether in-house or with a partner. I think in the public domain, you've certainly seen partnerships emerging between large IPP players and various mining houses to bring those skills into the mining houses quickly. You know, it's not only the mining sector, you've got Sasol also planning to do very, very large scale projects. And so, you know, I think this is very, very exciting for the sector that you know, until recently, the major renewables was coming out of the public procurement. But I think we are going to see a transition to the future of generation being built by the private sector. Now, we've brought our first project to financial close where at our mine, and that's actually what's shown in the picture there is the Vametco mine and their processing facility, and that piece of green land is actually where we're going to be building the PV plant with the battery. And that project was more of a demonstration plant to show that in our particular case, vanadium redox flow batteries could be banked, that we could get third-party equity and debt into a project that included the technology. And that's in fact what we achieved with this first project that will have a 4.5 megawatt PV plant with a 1 megawatt, 4 megawatt hour battery there. But we are looking at a project, a couple of orders of, well, the mine itself could take, you know, 50, 60 megawatts of PV with a large battery to basically then procure a lot of their energy, their daytime energy peak and standard hours from the phase 2 project, while also making them resilient to the load curtailment and load shedding that happens. So again, you were asking about the economics of that. We're seeing that the economics work. So certainly the generation side is almost a no-brainer, because typically the cost of generation is very competitive with Eskom's pricing. Whether or not it makes sense to deploy a battery really depends on those use case stacking. So if it hardly ever works for a single use case, but we expect that to change as technologies get cheaper. So like even just the tariff arbitrage case by itself, where you charge the battery with off-peak and dispatch into peak, could very quickly become cost, you know, just that alone. But we are seeing that where you stack these value propositions, that batteries are starting to make a strong case with a return in the projects, and we're seeing that in our own project as well.
I suppose also just sometimes avoiding that nuisance factor could become quite a valuable you know, opportunity, just not to have to deal with some of the consequences of an outage or having to reconfigure equipment, you know, whatever it might be.
And it's expensive. I mean, again, we see it in our own experience within our own group that you know, even curtailment leads to significant losses in production volumes. And one of our facilities that sits within a municipal area was until recently load shed. So we were running diesel gensets to support the key portions of the operation. And anybody who's running diesel to augment their supply will very quick, you know, will comment on how very expensive it is compared to typical grid pricing. And then also just to mention, I think the other big constraint is that there are a lot of commercial and industrial and mining entities that want to expand their activities and can't. There simply isn't grid capacity available to them. And this is another, I think, place where renewables plus storage can really unlock growth, where they cannot get more capacity from Eskom or a municipality, is actually to build their own infrastructure capable to work with the Eskom grid to basically provide the additional capacity that their project would require.
And I suppose as well, and Joe, this is something that perhaps you'd like to kind of add to, as we get to a point where wheeling is more easily accepted or more easily managed, perhaps is a better way of putting it. That ability to generate on one site could then very easily be translated to providing power to another site in another region or municipal area. Do you see that as being something for yourself, Frank, for instance, that would be part of a growing business case?
Sorry, Claire, did you ask me that question or Joe? Because you started off with...
Yeah, sorry. Let's start with you, because I'm not quite sure where Joe is at the moment and how easily she can join in the conversation.
Then I'll be able to answer it. Wait, after Frank. Let Frank go first and then I'll go.
Okay, all right. So the question really is that, you know, as wheeling becomes something that is perhaps a little bit more defined and the technicalities have been ironed out, the ability, for instance, to generate on one site and transmit the power to another site via multiple municipal jurisdictions or whatever is obviously going to be a lot easier. Do you see that, Frank, let's start with you, as an added kind of element to that business case, or is that already part of your thinking?
No, absolutely, and I think it is part of our thinking. You know, at this site with our own project, we want to build a larger than necessary solar plant to actually sell to a trader or a wheeler or another third party, because it simply makes sense for us to do that. I think what's important to, you know, I think the wheeling space is still unlocking and there's a lot of challenges there. But what it will do is enable customers who perhaps can't or are limited in the quantity of solar or wind or other technologies that they can build on site to acquire additional power. Well, I need to be careful there, because it doesn't necessarily mean they can now use more electricity than they were using before, because the actual technical capacity is still constrained by their local infrastructure in terms of their own substation, own supply lines in the area. What wheeling does allow them to do is obtain electricity perhaps at a lower price and certainly with a lower carbon attachment. And that's, you know, I think that is important. There's a lot of commercial and industrial customers who can't build on site. It's the same with us with our Vanchem facility within eMalahleni. You know, there's nowhere to build PV. We're in the middle of a big industrial area and we take up all the space that we have. You know, but to wheel in from somewhere else through Eskom, through eMalahleni to that facility is still undoable, should I say. We certainly hope that as the regulatory environment loosens up and the municipalities start enabling such, but a lot of that is actually more of an accounting issue or a paper issue, because one needs to know what was generated, where, who's it's been allocated to, how, what are all the other offsets that happen along the process. And so that system enablement, almost from a billing and tracking perspective, is perhaps the biggest challenge still to get wheeling properly working. But I do think it's going to play a key component. It will be key in the market to bring cheap green electricity to entities that can't do it themselves behind the meter.
Yeah, Joe and I have had many conversations about the whole wheeling accounting conversation, and I think if you could, it would be nice if you could just tag the electron and say, okay, this comes from here and this comes from there. It would, I suppose, make the accounting a little bit better, but of course that's not the way it works. So Joe, from your perspective, just in terms of the wheeling conversation, I mean, we've both spoken about this many times.
Okay.
Just how do you see this enabling or easing the market for mines and?
Okay, so I think that the weeding conversation is one, and there are very many narratives out there that weeding doesn't work and is not concluded. I think that South African market can be pleasantly surprised that there's been some really fast forward-thinking working done on it. It is now a working group 9 at a NECOM level, and I'm specifically focused on. We know that Eskom to Eskom is more or less sorted, but we need to have a focus on what happens through a municipality to an end customer. I don't want to hold this conversation up for long because I know clearly that I will then talk here for 3 hours. It's obviously my chief passion area. So I just think I would really want to give everyone the reassurance that, you know, within the next month we're going to see some major inputs on it, because I think that the whole private sector, how can I say, requirement from an emergency perspective within South Africa to have IPPs connected at a distributed level across the South African grid, and also the fact that every one of these IPPs that would materially connect to provide green energy are seeing challenges from network requirements, capacity requirements upstream. And we've got a lot of the IPPs getting massive quotations for upstream transmission work, grid work that needs to be done, etc. So based on that, wheeling has become very important in unlocking these. And if you had to look at a simple base case, if we had to say, what if a guy does not have, an entity does not have enough room to do the green energy, and he wants the relief on his account, right? So then he can transact. But remember that is just a pricing relief, but it's also giving grid relief upstream. I don't know if that's making sense. So it's important for us to be able to, one, unlock these IPPs, and we unlock these IPPs by making them commercially viable and bankable. And commercially viable and bankable means that the bank needs to have the reassurance that the wheeling contract is indeed bankable, that when they look at it through their risk perspective and their risk lenses, you know, that they can actually bank on it. And also that the era of the 20-year PPA is dead. You know, we need to start looking at 6 and 7 year PPA terms, because when you're engaging with the mining community, it's going to be very difficult to raise the greater PPA length. And this is where storage can play a marked difference between wheeling. So if you had to give you 2 examples, one, I've got an entity that requires the relief from the pricing, and he's happy and he can do his own self-security and sustainability, then he indeed banks that IPP further upstream. So he could be in Richards Bay and he's contracting with somebody out in the Polokwane area, right? So that IPP, that PV project obviously becomes more viable because it would then put its utility scale storage at the IPP's point and would be able to just dispatch into a greater bandwidth, right? So it starts putting power in at peak times, and that's for offset. When you look at a different scenario, what if you had an IPP, but your entity, Richards Bay, wants security of supply? You'd have your IPP generating, but you'd put you'd link your storage capacity on site and still have it as part of the wheeling transaction. So I am very confident that we are going to see major moves within the ability to wheel, purely from a regulatory point of view, and from a policy point of view, that it will be embraced, that it is not damaged by the fact of any pricing policy changes, and that the banks and the FDFIs and things will start embracing this. And the last thing that I'd just like to say there, that there should never ever be any wheeling contract or any wheeling structure that then is green energy on its own. Every one of those green energy IPPs at a distributed level needs to have an element of storage, whether it's on site at the IPP or off site at the consumer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. We have been getting some questions coming through, and Frank, I think that some of these are initially aimed at you. So I'm going to ask the 2 that I know for definite are for you, and that is, when will the Flow battery PV project break ground?
So we have broken ground. I'm very glad to say it's under construction at the moment. We hope to have the system fully commissioned probably early April or late April. It depends a little bit on how much more rain we get in December at the site, which has slowed down work a little bit. Yeah, but it is fully under construction. Many of the components have arrived, or they're on the sea. So yeah, so we're very excited to see it completed and to reach COD, yeah, sort of Q1 next year.
So if we have this conversation in May next year, hopefully behind you, we're going to see an array of solar panels as opposed to an open green field.
And a nice big battery too, yes.
Wonderful. We look forward to doing that. And then the second question that has come through is, are you planning a PV and battery storage solution at the Bushveld Minerals Vanchem mine? If so, can you supply an outline of the system specifications you are considering deploying?
Yeah, so we definitely are looking at the options. I can't, for various reasons, talk to what's on the table yet because it's still being discussed. But basically, what we've done is what we do with the other clients as well, is that we do the sort of use case analysis for the site. We look at the load profile, we look at what can be built on site, we look at the services the battery can provide, and we basically run a techno-financial feasibility model to optimize to see of all these various use cases that batteries can do, which ones make sense and generate sufficient revenue, you know, in that sort of stacked value proposition. So we are seeing that a battery at site makes sense. It really just depends. It's a little bit on the time frame and what the tariffs do a little bit right at the moment. But what we can't do is build solar on site. So we would definitely need to wheel in either from a site within eMalahleni or from Eskom through to the site. So that's one of the big challenges, is that at the moment today, we can't bring any third-party electricity through to the site because the policy or regulatory frameworks, you know, in eMalahleni don't exist yet to do that. But we certainly are working with the municipality and other entities to see how we can fast track that. We know I think Joe alluded to it, that there's work being done in the presidency around wheeling and around municipal wheeling frameworks being enabled. And that would certainly help, because if we can bring in cheaper electricity, then that improves the battery economics if we can use that cheaper electricity to charge, basically. So the work is ongoing there, but as I say, I can't say too much because yeah, it's still in that early stage. Yeah.
Fair enough. Frank, I'm going to stick with you for the moment, and I'm actually going to ask if we could take a step back a little bit and perhaps focus some of the attention on the various types of energy storage, or battery energy storage in particular, technologies that are out there. And perhaps you could also just run us through some of the pros and cons of these. I think that, you know, not all batteries are created equal. So I think it would be quite useful to have some insight just into what that landscape looks like.
Absolutely. And I think what's really exciting about the landscape is that we already have a number of tried and tested technologies that are well understood in the market. But we also have a plethora of emerging technologies, also with, you know, their own different performance characteristics, if you like, that may suit different use cases. So, you know, and so I almost expect that in the future, I mean, my friend Vito Schnabel often talks about having a symphony of generators, but I think we're going to actually see a symphony of generators and storage technologies and other components existing in the grid. If you consider like the lithium technologies, and even within the lithium technologies, you know, there's a number of technologies. You've got lithium, the normal lithium ion, the lithium phosphate that's now becoming very common. And, you know, the strengths of lithium batteries often have to do with weight and energy density, which is what you want. And also they don't slot around like a flow battery. So it's a technology that makes a lot of sense to go into a car or go into a laptop or a phone, or for short duration applications. So sort of like under 2 hour or up to 2 hour applications, we typically see that lithium batteries make sense. The challenge with lithium is degradation, that the harder or you use the battery, or the more you use the battery, the sooner it loses its capacity, and you have capacity degradation. That's a similar issue with lead acid, which is also very popular. I still think lead acid batteries, you know, strongly have a place, because although They have significantly lower cycle life than lithium before you have to replace them. They are still a lot cheaper than lithium batteries. So even in backup applications, UPSs and similar, lead acid actually might make a better proposition than lithium. And then, obviously the one that I'm a big fan of is the vanadium redox flow battery. And I think where it's seeing its strengths is in long duration applications. One of the things with vanadium batteries is the power and energy are decoupled. So you can have, say, a 1 megawatt battery with however many megawatt hours you want. And what we're seeing is that the economics, the battery gets cheaper per megawatt hour the more megawatt hours you add to the battery. So at the sort of 4-hour or 6-hour level, say like a 1 megawatt, 6 megawatt hour vanadium battery, the pricing in a storage financial model starts to look attractive. Its challenge is that the capex is still very high, but you have the upside that there's no degradation. So with vanadium batteries, you can work them to death. You can double cycle them every year, and after 20 years, they'll still have all of their capacity. And they also have a very high residual value because the electrolyte that contains vanadium that makes up most of the battery is very easy to recycle and to recover that vanadium or to put it in a second or third or fourth life battery. So what, and this comes to, again, the sort of like the performance modeling. It's very important when considering storage technologies, not to just look at the price on paper, but actually how the battery performs in your particular use case and financial model. With where vanadium batteries are weak is their size. They're 3 to 4 times bigger than a lithium battery because their energy density is lower. But on the other hand, they have zero fire risk. So where you may have a fire concern, some technologies do have fire risk associated with them, which can lead to like hidden costs. Like, we know that insurance for lithium batteries is higher than for vanadium batteries, for example. And again, so it comes back to actually looking at it holistically. And then we're seeing some very exciting technologies emerge, like iron flow batteries, that if they can get the technology right, could be really, really cheap because your main ingredient is quite cheap. But the challenge there is that they're not yet, and the same with like gravity batteries and other batteries, is that they're emerging and they look exciting. They're not fully commercial yet. There's often only one manufacturer of the technology. And so there's risk associated with that. But, and again, with any emerging technology, hopefully these technologies get through that. But certainly, I do expect to see, even in the South African grid, quite a range of storage technologies, depending on the exact application that they're being deployed. I mean, perhaps one other that I didn't mention is like the flywheel, for example. So flywheel storage is also well developed, very well suited for very short durations. So like sub half an hour. If so basically a high power to energy ratio, which can often be enough to solve dip problems, or if you're still running diesel, to allow handover from the grid to the diesel while the diesel starts. So again, but it is a moving target because pricing is changing all the time. Lithium pricing, is going up. If you're looking to augment your project in the future with future lithium, there's risk around what lithium batteries might cost in the future. But it just makes it actually a very exciting and dynamic space at the moment.
And I suppose as well, given that South Africa is actually home to a lot of the minerals that are required to produce a lot of these battery technologies, it is, it's a really great opportunity for us to not only be able to mine them, but to also provide some sort of level of processing and even hopefully local manufacturing, for our own use.
Yeah, and I mean, that's completely our strategy, because we're building our electrolyte plant in East London already to make electrolyte for vanadium batteries. That can get you to sort of like the 30 to 50% local content level in terms of cost, depending on the size of the battery straight away. So that's really exciting because it's mining, it's beneficiation, and we certainly would like to see much more of the battery made locally, because being a flow battery, a lot of it is quite mechanical. There's tanks, there's pipes, there's pumps, a lot of components that can easily be made in South Africa. I mean, to give a shout out to the lithium guys as well. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize actually how big the lithium manufacturing market in South Africa is already as well. Now, that might be mostly assembly with the cells being imported and the batteries being built. But there's still been a lot of IP developed in South Africa around battery management systems and around integrating these batteries. And you know, from my conversations with the local lithium manufacturers, they're already making over a gigawatt hour of batteries locally. That's mostly going into the residential space. But that's really exciting to have 4 or 5 homegrown battery, you know, manufacturers in the lithium space that are being super successful. And I certainly hope, you know, obviously we hope to scale and provide big batteries for their applications, but I hope the other local manufacturers will also have success supplying into the commercial, industrial, and mining space where that technology makes sense, rather than seeing, again, a just imported product.
Yeah. I mean, we have definitely seen a huge increase in what are being termed as kind of like mini power stations being made available for commercial, well, for domestic use in particular, to just help mitigate some of the challenges of load shedding. It's incredible, you know, if you look at what it was 3 or 4 years ago compared to what it is now. I mean, you can't go into a hardware store without tripping over 5 or 6 different types of batteries, which is amazing.
Agreed.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just also wanted to mention to you, so in conjunction with the South African Energy Storage Association, we and a couple of other partners worked to put together a book called The Fundamentals of Battery Energy Storage for Beginners. This is aimed predominantly at commercial and industrial entities, and there is a link that should be showing up in the chat, and you are more than welcome to download that. We are also very interested to receive any feedback or any comments or any requirements for additions to the book. This is not going to be a one-time thing. We have plans to be updating it at least once a year, probably twice a year in the beginning. So please feel free to take advantage and download that. Some other questions that have been coming in, yeah, Joe, this is one I'm going to aim at you to start with. Are you seeing any opportunities for battery storage provision associated with the production of hydrogen in South Africa?
Hi, Tim. Can you hear me? I just want to confirm if you can hear me.
Yes, yes, we can. Thanks.
Which is the sign of the madness that I'm into. But
join the club. Join the club.
So on hydrogen, obviously they need the green source, you know what I mean, which we know the grid won't provide. So it depends on which, I mean, the hydrogen is a broad sector, you know, that's emerging. It's an exciting sector for the world. I think it's on a lot of conversations. And I think obviously in their preparation work, in the run-up work, you know, there's quite a bit of, as you said, provisioning. I think whoever asked you a question, I'm provisioning for it. It's going to predominantly come obviously on the energy supply source, which would be the wind, you know, your wind farms and your PV farms. So I know some of the projects that are on the tables now have got huge amounts of wind and PV production, you know, into the hydrogen as a source. If you had to look at some of the transitions that some of the entities, and I don't want to name them by names, but I'm sure everybody would know maybe who the largest emitter is that needs to change the focus of the work and of the production. There are aggressive hydrogen as a source. The batteries, I think, we're playing element. Remember what I said to you is that I feel the batteries are integral to the grid because it helps that grid expand and so we can make the transition. So I'm still of the mindset that wherever we replace the batteries, it's going to put the relief onto the grid, right? Because we've got the different types of batteries that Frank spoke about. So it depends on whether you want to have a slow load uptake and downtake, you know, along a longer cycle. But you know, in some of the other technologies like 5.4, that we're seeing very dynamic responses. You know, frequency control. We're seeing some amazing voltage control. We're seeing some amazing results of, you know, where 100 megawatts can be discharged back into the grid within an hour. You know what I mean? So on that, it would still interest me on this massive amount of wind and PV that gets coupled to the hydrogen supply, maybe where they would want to balance that out as well with the storage and stuff. So I don't believe that there are separate technologies. I do really believe that we are creating these new type of networks and grids that are going to be very different from what we understand at this specific point. Frank referred to the TFD planning, and if you have to look at the TFD planning, you're going to see where there are nodes and areas of almost 26 very large transformers needed across the South African grid, and interspersed between those, you're going to see the scale. That's why we anxiously wait for the IPP office with the bid for the 313. We know that the requirements is far in excess of the 6x that's reported. So it's a sideline role player to this larger conversation, but I don't think you're going to be seeing these massive farms and PV farms supporting hydrogen as its energy source without having battery causing stability on the grid somewhere from a frequency control point.
Okay, thanks, Joe. I hope that everybody was able to hear that. I know that towards the end, Joe's signal became a little bit of a challenge, but Frank, I just wanted to check, do you have anything that you'd like to add to what Joe was seeing? I mean, and this is an indication of my ignorance when it comes to this. Are hydrogen fuel cells considered a form of storage or battery storage, or do they have a different classification?
Yeah, so maybe not so much the fuel cell, which is converting hydrogen to electricity, but the hydrogen itself, whether stored as hydrogen or ammonia or some other product made of hydrogen, can absolutely be considered as a form of storage. Because basically what you're doing is you're starting with water and energy, you're using that energy to create hydrogen, or I say energy, but it's electricity. You're starting with water and electricity, you're creating hydrogen, and at some stage you're taking the hydrogen back to be electricity. So it is a sort of intermediary storage and carrier type of product. And but there's still a lot of pricing and efficiency challenges there. So where hydrogen may be useful as storage is actually very long duration. So when you start considering weeks or months of storage, if you consider Europe, for example, that needs significant heating demand in the winter, that might be a good application for hydrogen, where you're making hydrogen throughout the year, you're storing it, but then you're dispatching it on demand for heating in very cold locations. But if you consider other applications for hydrogen, which in my view would be predominantly, again, to replace direct fossil fuel heating, so in the green steel space, in terms of fueling big yellow machines on mines, you're going to still need to make that hydrogen, and although the electricity and the energy would predominantly come from generation, there might still be some need to have, your normal sort of chemical batteries smoothing out that PV and wind, so that your electrolyzers can run more efficiently. But I don't see that as a big application for chemical batteries on the to go with the generation to run the electrolyzers, because there is also the ability to ramp up the electrolyzers with the generation as they produce hydrogen. But it certainly is a new and emerging space that I think also remains super interesting as a sister almost to chemical batteries, is the hydrogen space, and what the role it can play, and in terms of decarbonization.
Yeah, it's obviously been an item that we've touched on over the course of the last 2 days, and I think is something that is garnering a lot of attention, but that still has quite a bit of, I can't say suspicion, but maybe a lot of caution surrounding a full-scale sort of assault on hydrogen at the moment. We have got 4 minutes left, and I think in order for us to wrap efficiently, what I am going to ask Joe, perhaps you could just share the most important takeaway that you would like the audience to leave with today as far as this discussion is concerned, and the role that storage is going to play not only in mining but in power generally in the coming years.
Sure. You said we only have 4 minutes. I need 4 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that one.
I
just think that
I'm sorry.
I just think that every South African entity, whether it's a homeowner, whether it's a CNI space or utility scale or, you know, a great big mine, I think we all need to be pragmatic, and we all need to know that we're all in this one big ship, and it's the good ship South Africa Energy, and unfortunately it's in trouble. And unless we all, you know, pick ourselves up and decide how we're going to contribute, you know, the ship is going to sink. And the reality is here. So, like you said, when you pop into your builder's market, you see hundreds of little, you know, units and things. I think people have now decided they need to sell provision, and that's what's going to change our network and our grid family. You know what I mean? So, from a very small distribution level to a very large distribution level, we're going to see large amounts and large volumes of storage becoming a very distributed, contributing, you know, sort of technology. And you know, we had policy challenges and we had all the other type of challenges, but this is it's just going to be the disruptor. I mean, storage is known to be a disruptor, you know, worldwide, and I think it's going to be one that's going to be embraced, that's going to be required. I think what is really necessary is a lot more sharing from entities and a lot more education, because we find a lot of entities, you know, don't maybe understand the storage niches or what their options are, or how actually to do that, you know, that financial modeling you were questioning me about. So I think that, you know, these base cases and these case studies that we see, we need to start sharing them a lot more. And maybe that's something that could come from your platform. I think it's very important. I think that sometimes we're very resistant, you know, and IPPs and different tech departments are very, you know, hold everything, all their cards close to the chest. But we're in a crisis and we need to get out of this crisis. And the only way it's going to be is to create what I call family. That needs to be a storage, PV, wind, hydrogen, you know, whichever tech, it has to be, you know, all the different technologies, but we're going to be a family. The technology itself is proven, and I just think that we need to have some points, and I'm quite happy to see this, you know, the reference point for inquiries, and I will do my legal base as well, and I'm sure you will, you know, across your platforms, that we can encourage entities to embrace.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Joe, I think we've lost you. But Frank, perhaps I could ask you to just share your thoughts before I close off.
The revolution is such, but irrespective, it's going to happen.
Thanks, Joe. We did lose a little bit of.
So I feel for Joe, because Joe really does do a lot of for the industry, and so sorry that she doesn't get to end. But no, I think maybe just to end, I think we actually, despite the challenges, and it is a big challenge, energy security and load shedding that we're having today, the insecurity it creates around jobs and the inability to grow the economy, we actually also sit on an incredible opportunity to grow new local businesses. And, you know, we haven't really just touched on the just energy transition, but I think the just energy transition will require a huge amount of participation between the private and the public sector. It's going to require, you know, building huge amounts of renewables and batteries. And there's a massive opportunity to build new industries and move people from old dirty industries into these clean industries, and to have the whole value chains from the mining, starting with the mining, like you said, the minerals that we do have in South Africa, we have almost all of them, to do the various different technologies, and then to be building the processing plants to beneficate, building the technologies, whether they're solar or wind or biomass or different battery technologies, to do that locally. And we solve two issues. We solve the issue around the end of life of coal and all the job losses that are going to come with that. But we also solve the economic challenges of the constrained electricity supply.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there were a number of other things that I would have liked us to have touched on: calculation of load, how you kind of determine the size battery you need, how you determine the kind of the duration of the battery you need, because that of course is a whole nother rabbit hole down which we could slip. And of course,
what you need to do. Really clear, that's an exciting space. That's what I said to you about case studies. If we can encourage everybody to start forwarding to you case studies, and you could have this database, it would be perfect.
Yeah. So I think there is an opportunity, as Joe mentioned as well, for us to look at doing some of that financial modeling. There's obviously a lot to unpack when it comes to storage. I think it's a really exciting opportunity, not just for the world, but for South Africa as well. We're really well positioned not only to generate a lot of this renewable energy, but also to start developing a storage sector of our own. And I would like to just say to Frank and to Joe, thank you so much for sharing some of your really, really incredible and valuable insights with us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you as well. We will be back tomorrow the same time, and then tomorrow we're going to be talking just some of the technological opportunities that are available to ease the shifting from, say, grid connection to generators and back. Also looking at a technology that is changing what would previously have been considered unusable land for mines and for the way that they generate electricity. So from me, Claire Volkvan, and from the Mining Review, ESI Africa teams, and from our speakers, thanks so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day further. Cheers.